So we live in neither the past, nor the future, nor the present. Where do we live? We live in this moment of complete and perpetual insanity, in which, as an optimist, I want to recall beautifully about it. Well, despite all the dread that is about marketing manufacture. Now, in this case, it's that beauty, it's a strange constellation of kingdoms, of uncountable worlds. So basically, we find here the perfect combination of the terrestrial and the aquatic. The convergence of these spaces is not accidental. In fact, it was the pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus who talks about the earth melting into the sky and the sky melting into the earth. So the sense of a nicely stratified world where you have terra firma as an atmosphere is not really about that. It's really about the coexistence of all the elements. And very much this particular exhibition is about the examination of all the elements. It's about water, it's about air, and it's about earth. But if we think we should separate them, then we have a problem. And I'm going to get to that in a minute. I just want us to look, and this wasn't a part of sorry, my apologies, Becky. This wasn't a part of the conversation, but I was thinking about the port. And I was thinking about that and said, well, let's think about what the Portuguese, or what Portugal has offered us. Because cork is recyclable and biodegradable. Cork harvesting does not destroy a tree. And this is a lovely phrase I just learned today. It is a carbon sink. So it contains carbon. It contains water. So how, for instance, there's an amazing capacity to regenerate. So it's a very life-affirming material as well. It conserves water, so it actually serves as a way of protecting the tree from erosion. It's energy efficient. There's insulation properties, thermal and acoustic. And it's used for the podcasts that we do over here. So it is a sanctum, but it's a sanctum that is actually designed and developed through the honoring of what is best in the natural world, converting it through design, through architecture, to produce a way of living well. And I think that's why I wanted to bring us into this space. Before we moved on. Sorry, I get to Jonathan, yeah, to make sure that you're there. And that we are together, we are one.
What an experience.
I really love it. So I want us to all move aside of it. You know, this firstly, I know I'm being terribly partisan, but the Joburg Contemporary Art Foundation, as I was saying to this lovely couple earlier, is to me the finest museum in South Africa. It's a space not only for its elegance, but for its acuity, its smarts, its intelligence, but also its incredible sensitivity to what it means to be alive. And to create an installation like this is something absolutely remarkable. Because, you know, in the world we live in at the moment, there is an overinflation of the fascination with immersive art. You know, for example, I don't know if anybody like me was absolutely horrified when they decided to start animating the Van Gogh paintings. And then literally, I don't know, I was apoplectic. And then I was actually at an Oliver Eliasson installation of the Tate, and there's something called the blind passageway, and I had to stand in a row of people waiting to go into a space. But once I stepped in, I couldn't see a single thing. So I was walking around where this young couple were taking selfies. Of what? I have no idea. Maybe the London Mist in a murder mystery in a 19th century novel or something. But it was absolutely repellent, so I spent most of my time just watching people and the absurdity of our intoxication with technology. And that's just so much immersive art. The Yo-Yo Kusama's Infinity Room, for example, the marvel of those things. But it's like being in a fun house. And it's a form of infantilization. Because, of course, we are becoming increasingly more, and this is no disservice to the brilliance of children, but we are really becoming incredibly stupid and childlike in the worst sense of the word. So, that retardation is the sum of advanced technology. As a counterpoint to that, you have an immersive experience as elegant, as subtle, as sensuous as this one. Now, it's by Ernesto Neto, and it is called, very curiously, One Day We Were Fish. So, I was wondering if JCAF had made a grammatical error. I'm wondering. And then I thought, well, anyway, I'm going to try and figure out a way to figure out the grammar. So I thought, okay, there's the future tense, one day. There's the past tense, we were. So, clearly, in our future and in our past, we were fish. Which, of course, then made me think of, obviously, like any idiot, I went straight to Charles Darwin. And, of course, I started reading up on that this morning, trying to figure out why that particular philosophy, because he actually found a very intelligent way of balancing a belief in God with the need for science, which people forget. But it wasn't Darwin's views that struck me most as I continued working. I started thinking about
being caught in the net.
pardon?
Being caught in the net.
Being caught.
That's why we're a fish.
Well, but the thing is also be told, I'm told I'm not allowed to eat prawns and I'm not allowed to eat fish anymore and everything's been harvested and we must stop eating it. And I get really upset because I do love fish. But yes, we are trapped. But the key thing is we as human beings are inherently amphibian. And I'm not here saying this to do a disservice to those who believe that the world was created in 7 days. Bless you. What I'm trying to get at is the complexity of what it means to be human. And in fact, something else I learned today was Jacques Cousteau, the great mariner. I mean, he mentioned something in my research. Said, did you know? No, I didn't. That our blood has got the same components as salt water. So, oh, okay. I have to share that with everybody. I just learned this. I'm going to sound a little smart explaining it, but I just learned it a few hours ago. It made me think again, that whole nature of the amphibian nature of being human. And this is going to be something that becomes very important when we look at another work of that. But what I want to do, actually look at here, is something that I came across in terms of one day we were all fish. It wasn't Darwin that I finally decided to share with you, but Publius Ovid, the author of Metamorphoses. And he said, my purpose is to tell of bodies which have been transformed from the earliest beginnings of the world down to my own times. So the thing is, what's remarkable, I don't know how many of you love history, and I was just sharing this moment with this couple earlier about reading a book about 1860 and the life of Morisot and Manet, and I'm totally in it, and I'm suddenly there in Paris in 1860, and I'm having a happy time. But the point is, we immerse ourselves in different points in history. We are there, and I think what we need to do is travel through time. But what we do are about is about evolutionary time. So what we are right now is not what our forefathers were. Even our recent forefathers, the cultures and values that were held, let's say, in 1930, are utterly different to the values that we hold right now. So therefore, when Ovid says the need to study how we transform, I think what this particular installation is trying to do is ask us to think about our origins, to think about the idea that we changed, to think about the fact that Earth is inextricably connected to water and that we are made of both. And we'll get to that issue when we go across there in a moment. But just very quickly to also something that Ernesto Neto was talking about, and he says, this work that we are inside right now is actually part of a series of installations called the Earth's Belly. So it's about what the Earth's belly could also be, the bottom of the ocean as well, you know. But the Earth's belly, and it's made, the materials are made from traditional African Brazilian textiles. And what he's interested in is how cultures transform through a globalization which remain coherent. Now, this is a complicated issue because the problem with generalization is always that one needs to unpack it more subtly and more materially, because yes, you can say the cultures transform through globalization, yet remain coherent. I would like to figure out how transformation and coherence actually interplay and intersect in an individual life. You see, I think that's for all of us to understand. If we are perpetually transforming, if we are caught in a major media sphere in the space of globalization, then how do we locate ourselves? And how do we cohere? Is there an essence that prevails, that defines us as human? Or are we constantly making ourselves up as we move along? And as we'll get to this issue because of a shocking remark found in this book called the Bible, which I will also be sharing at some point as we move along. But I think we should get through to... By the way, my mom is a devout Catholic who walks to church and goes to church every day. So my point's here not to challenge people who believe in orthodoxy. That's not the point at all. Because Louis Pasteur was more Germanist, and he makes a very simple argument that is incredible. And he says, every living thing from a living thing. Okay, so the very what we can get is pretty much not the point. So this is not the point of life. But the point is, actually, there's nothing to do with evolution. Because nothing dies, things degenerate in their different ways. They transform, which might not occupy the conditions of one's previous existence, but things alter. So that idea that every living thing from a living thing. And the reason why I found that intriguing, because what startled me about the next quote, and forgive me, I don't know where it comes from the Bible, so I'm sure that much more resourceful people over here could help me. But these are the lines that are transcribed, and my eyes turned into sources as I continued reading, like you read horror novels. You know, something, oh my God, that happened. Did they think that? Are they crazy? But anyway, this is the crazy. God said, let the earth produce vegetation. Let the earth produce every kind of living creature. God said, let us make man in our image. So I love the idea of produced vegetation. I love the idea of every living creature. But I get a bit perturbed when it says, God said, let us make man in our image. Now, given the fact that, quote unquote, man is perpetually morphing, as I've said right at the start, that we're perpetually evolving, then what is going to be our image? It raises the major issue around idealism and the fantasies of what defines humankind or mankind. So the question here, so in the likeness of ourselves, and let man, let us, be masters of the fish and of the sea, the birds of heaven, the cattle and the wild beasts, and all the reptiles that crawl upon the earth. Now, I'm loving all the reptiles and the wild animals and the cattle and the fish. I'm loving all of that. I'm loving our coexistence with all the things. I'm just not loving the fact that we are somehow delegated to dominate and control and determine the fates of all other species on the planet. And that legitimacy is given to the grand euphemism, rather like Simon says, God says. So it's the ultimate mystery that is accorded to something that is authoritarian, that delegates from the top, but without any purview, any sort of surveying, any questioning of the validity of that domination. It's no different to British colonialism. The British Empire said, let us be the rulers of this, let's be the rulers of that. You know, so it's not something only that's only theological. It's all forms of imperious conduct. And we at this stage in our history, human civilization, are deeply wary of imperious conduct. Well, the healthy-minded ones amongst us are. The rest, of course, are the serfs who love dogma, who love domination, who love civility, who love to be subjected. So this is the intensive conflict that we are in at the moment. So I'd like to hope, as I said, as a positive person, that we all want to our kindness and our goodness and our passion for each other and our mutual growth, rather than trying to stomp your jackboot onto something. This work, as the work for me, embodies that sense of interrelationship between land and sea. I've got, it's in my notebook, but could you please tell me the name of this artist and the origin of this artist?
She's from Mumbai. Her name is Rithika Merchant, and the work is titled Trans-Tidal.
Trans-Tidal. I've got it in here, but I'm still struck with this. But what is going on in this work? Now, I don't know, did anybody go to Amitav Ghosh's talk on ecology? What's that brilliant novel he wrote about the Sundarbans? Bay of... It's a great novel.
Talk about it.
But what I'm getting at is that you said the artist was from Mumbai, but I was thinking about the Sundarbans, because basically it's a gigantic marshland that floods. So what we're dealing with is it's in Kerala, and we know right now, of course, the terrible floods that have happened in Kerala, and entire families. In my case, one case, it was a family of 16 who were decimated in one flood, the entire family. Yeah. Whole villages, by the stage where we're about 1,000 people gone, because of a natural upheaval, not a political upheaval. So that drama and tension between land and sea has been played out very beautifully, but also, as I read in this excellent catalogue, the whole relationship between myth and story, because what binds a people together, what makes anything significant, it is the fact of living, but also the psychological, oral matter that makes a life have purpose. This is my story, this is my beginning, this is my family, this is where I come from. And then also all the mythologies built around, for example, pointing out one here. It's beautiful. So you've got this whole idea of this of the snake in liquid space, but then you also have this creature, which could be, it's undecided, could be potentially dead. It could be symbolically a point between flight and earth, could be the point of connection. But what's going on? Also the water spaces start resembling roots as well, because of course water patterns, as we know, are not just, you go into the water and there are all kinds of undercurrents and all kinds of other narratives and languages and labyrinths and movements and energies that are happening constantly. So it's that beautiful sense, but it also picks up on ancient painting, and there's ancient scrolls, but it's a modern work made very recently. So it gives you a sense of tradition, finds the place between tradition and modernity. It asks us to think about how human beings cohabit with nature, how other creatures cohabit inside of nature. Because of course, we inhabit the world, but the world inhabits us. It's a continuous filtration. The mistake is to believe Simon says, God says, I dictate, and therefore you become the arbiter of your own world. That's where the profound error lies. This is where this particular exhibition is trying to create a new kind of consciousness, where we find our place in the greater scheme of things, not with any mock humility. Nobody's asking you to remove your egos or your agency. All we're saying is, how do you reconcile your agency within a more complex constellation, which is material, mortal, economic, cultural, social, spiritual? And all of these aspects somehow converge together to give us a sense that if we are evolving, and I believe we are, and I believe we are evolving at a rapid rate as we have no choice, because we have this cut-off point. We can either go into Armageddon, or we can move into a space and state of grace. This is the reckoning. And this happened, interestingly enough, at that, just a few years ago, we were all in lockdown. Remember at that space, there we were, suddenly locked into our homes, forced into our inner worlds. Some people wrote novels, in that space. But what I'm trying to get at, we were locked into our inner worlds, and two things happened. People fell into two kinds of silos. The one silo was the silo of hatred. And you found basically that COVID became an incubator for fascism. But it also became an incubator for new ideas. That's why we have, for example, the escalation in diversity, the rising value of women artists in the global canon, or black artists. All these things happened. They all happened from that point. 2020, till now, you suddenly find this major shift. And what we have this moment is this time bomb of two conflicting states produced under one ecology, a global pandemic. So either you follow the role of hate and domination and control, or you find a space of embrace. Now what's happening here is that conflation and tension between worlds. Our vulnerability is part of being human. We cannot sit there and say, the tsunami hit me, why did the tsunami hit me? And expect an answer. It's how we actually integrate ourselves to the tempests that are an integral part of life, that cannot just be merely wished away. So, am I speaking clearly enough? Yes, I know this gentleman over here specifically. Sorry. Just switch it. Oh, it's gone back. Okay, so we're moving to a very different. So, for example, is a narrative painting. That would be a classic definition of what's going on over here. And the famous narrative, the first early narrative works in an era of Christianity. Apparently, we're still in it. I'm debating that. But in the era of Christianity, when the first sort of murals, church murals were created, they were created because most people were illiterate. They could not read. So the parabolic parables became the integral way in which meaning was communicated. The same thing is in this space. With the parabolic or narrative painting, you can really find a story within it and find your own story inside of it. Very different to these works over here. So, Bronco Cats has a work over here. This might not look like much to some people who obviously are more attuned to the skills displayed in that subject. But in my estimation, Ron Cass is one of the most brilliant young South African conceptual artists, and who works with materials nobody would think of, and creates artworks, for example. Probably her most classic and most famous works were basically the repurposing of a bed stripped of its stuffing. So all you have are the quills of a mattress. And she'll break that down even further. So you will sometimes not even, you will barely see that there was a bed. But there's a structure that's familiar, but it's become so strange because she's estranged us from the known. Here she's using copper wire to do what? You'd say, well, it just seems to be a lot of contorted lines. It's a mesh, and yes, but there's a structure, there's a body. So it's basically a relief work. So it's a sculpture that's not in the round, but it's definitely sculptural. But what is going on in this room? Firstly, let's look at the material. The material is copper, which is a conductor of heat and electricity. And it is the earliest metal to be is over 10,000 years ago. Yeah. What's interesting about this material is how it sharply contrasts with the one behind you. As Ezekiel Pozo as clay, which is the most ancient raw material for human invention and creation. Not only for the creation of pots and but also the creation of art and for creating the world that defines us. And here, to find a way to contrast these things, Plutarch has a beautiful phrase that I discovered again today, never knew it before. No man ever wetted clay and then left it, as if there would be bricks by chance and fortune. So, you don't just wet something, you've got to make it, you've got to complete it. And the first thing with technology, being a system and a method, well, that's technology. It might not be connected with what you think of as science, in the familiar sense, but it's there. Science doesn't work. But what we are asking ourselves to think about is why is clay, again, the most defining material that qualifies what it means to be human? Why? It's earth and water. It's amphibian. It's the combination of two materials. It's like that point of the vein, what I imagine as the Sundarbans. You have the littoral. Littoral is the point where the divide between land and sea is called the littoral. But you have also the flooding over of these spaces and the interconnectedness. Well, it's out of that interconnectedness that we get form and shape and create the world that we know. Now, there are many different elements. Of course, here we're dealing with, obviously, air, water, and earth. I'm not even going to go into fire. But what I am going to go into is something that I wrote about 3 years ago, so I'll dig it up again. Thales of Miletus, a pre-Socratic philosopher. And I literally tried, because it was so long, I had to cut it down, which is a more compact summary. And he speaks about breathing of animals is in moisture. The seed and kernels of plants are soft and tender, unless plant-stricken, obviously. Metals also melt and become fluid. And one concrete, yeah. And then I can't even read what I wrote. Okay, we'll move out of that. The earth itself is fertilized and revived by showers of irrigation. The earth and mud seem nothing else than lees and sediments of water. Air is but the exhalation and expansion of water. Fire cannot be lighted nor fed except with moisture. The fatness which belongs to moisture, and by means of moisture, which is the support of and life of flame and fire, seems a kind of ripeness and the concoction of water. Now, I'm not trying to say that water is the primary element. I was just struck by how Thales finds a way to take one element and explain its enormous relevance. So you need to realize the interconnectedness of elements. The essential nature of water becomes pretty critical because, of course, we're also now dealing, and something I learned from the JCAF book, which I'm going to get to soon, is the commodification of water, which is one of the big concerns as we move on. So, now you all know, or may not know, of the well-known phrase by Paul Klee, taking a line through a walk. He says, when you draw, you take a line through a walk. So in a sense, what happens is that everything about the making of any art form is intrinsically gestural. So what's happening here is we're having that wonderful sort of weaving in and out of lines that creates a sense of movement, it creates its own narrative. But the narrative is not acceptable. There's no story in the obvious sense, so they're starkly counterpointed. But it's got to do with what else makes up what it is that we are. why should we prioritize meaning? Okay, which we do, or we try to do at schools. So I was saying kind things about schools before, but now, just to question that, why do we prioritize something having a meaning? Why can't something be just a sensation, or an intuition, or an instinct, and still have enormous value in one's life? Now, what I'm saying here, if that is about parables, about narratives in painting, this is about intuitive spaces of expression, of gesture, of instinct. And perhaps the most famous artist who works with the line is Sai Tuong Lee. But Bronwyn is not working with the line in drawing, but she's working inside the principle of using a sculptural form. Now, sculpture is not typically associated. Well, when you think of the line in sculpture, you think perhaps of an Eduardo Villa. It's extremely rectilinear, but it's nothing as fine as this. There's an incredible sense of solidity and heft in that diagrammatic energy that vectors create and push and create with energy and force in those works by Villa. But here there's a softness in the line, an undulation, a meander, a movement, a feeling. There is shock horror, a soul, in something that you would say is merely made of metal. Where can the soul potentially lie? But as Tallis says, even metals become fluid. So the things that we think of as solid are, as Karl Marx says, also things that can melt into air. So if we realize that, we're dealing with the fact that all of life is not about what we falsely claim, about solidity. Okay? We've got to stand, have a soul, be a noun, be a person. No. It's about the complete reverse. Life is about liquefaction. It's about liquidity. It's about melting and morphing and changing and altering. And enjoying the wonder of that is not enjoying a way of understanding art alone. It's a way of embracing your life in a way that's much more kinder. Because otherwise we end up reprimanding ourselves because we hate, supposedly, contradicting ourselves. Or we're not supposed to contradict ourselves. But we contradict ourselves all the time. Because the mind is not a chapel for reason. The mind is a sensuous, intuitive, and instinctive organ. Okay? Yes, we create divisions, create left and right, etc., create these different spheres. But what about the interconnectedness of all of this? And this is what's happening as the overall guiding principle. So here the artist apparently was inspired by the words of his father at his deathbed. But what was intriguing, and I did not do the research, is apparently the father spoke to the son of Proust, of Marcel Proust, and about a bird, the sound of a bird moving through a forest. That's what I did not get around to actually accessing. But enough of it was there for me to understand what we're dealing with is air, what we're dealing with is flight. And what we're dealing with is a very, very complicated dance because, of course, air is many things. Air is a space, an object, a threat, a myth, a weapon, a comment, so far as all of us embrace it. So I got this from the JCAF catalog, which you must get and read. It's a superb document. But the thing is, what I'm asking you to think about here is what you think of, and we know, of course, and you know better than me because I've only been in Johannesburg for 2.5 years. But the first time I've ever thought about dust or written about it was when I came here, because everybody was talking to me about it. So I had to think about this. What is dust? And brilliant artists have actually been making this the theme of their work. And then there's also the talk about congestion. And so they're talking about the policing of the air, and basically the fact that air, we talk about air spaces, but air cannot be bounded as neatly and as tightly as we'd like to. The barriers always break. So what's happening in that work over there is obviously we're dealing with a certain kind of congestion, an ability to see a mist, a density that could be seen as potentially toxic. Because of course what we forget, when we talk about London's fog, we forget that London's fog is actually a product of industrialization. And interestingly, 19th century painting, if you start with Turner, right from Turner, he's already bothered by those steam engines, and he's bothered about what's happening to the sky, but he's also in love with it, because with the contaminants that are now entering the sky, new kinds of luminosities and densities appear. And then we find that repeated in Whistler's paintings. And we find it again in Monet when he visits London. Again, we find that fog becoming an integral part of a new kind of way of looking at the world in and through contamination. So what we think of, and of course, Impressionism remains the most loved art form by the largest group of people on the planet. And it's interesting that we love it, and people tend to forget that inclusion, that opacity, comes from contamination. And because there was actually some artists who were aware of it at the time. But for us, it's about the beauty and the mystery of opacity. Here, I don't see beauty or mystery in opacity. I just see threat, and I just see uncertainty, and I see a sense of anxiety in not being able to contain. Imagine if you lost a 3-year-old child in a space like that. You wouldn't go, oh, it's a glorious space. You'd freak out, because that's when you want the world to be totally clear. But different kind of way in which flight is being told over here. Flight's being told, but these are not naturalist. It's funny. It's not Clive Kellner. Who's the Clive who was the great naturalist painter? Pippa Scottness's. Isn't it getting mixed up?
Did you say Peter Scott?
No. Pippa Scottness's husband is called? But anyway, he was a great naturalist portrait, and he did astonishing works that have an almost scientific clarity. This does not have this, but it still works within the realm of what we call realism. And what it is really about is the consecration, ultimately, of bird life. But it is not, it's only in the constellation that the impact starts hitting you more and more. We, for example, you and I would probably have wine in our home and would feel incredibly happy. I would have one and be very happy. I've got deer in my case. One painting of deer, just right by my bedside. So the thing is, so we have this constellatory naturalistic work in our world, but this intensification asks us to think about a kingdom that, well, for me, it's part of my being, as I said, because we have to actually work within the ground circulation of all creatures, great and small, within one's being, and that's where the joy of living comes from. But if you're out there with, your gun, you're having a totally different dialogue with nature, you're God, deciding, well, that one goes, I am the Lord of that kingdom, I'm the Lord of this kingdom. So you have a totally different dialogue. So do you want to hold on to humility, or do you want to hold on to a sense of order and domination? So the works of here, these are, actually I'm going to go now to my book, because right on the page, Joan Sack. So the works over here are called Thunderstorm Typology and Cloud Tower. Now, for people who are designers and architects, they probably have the most immediate affection for these structures, because they have a certain kind of clinical resolve and subtle beauty, kind of very clinical sculptural quality. And also the drawings over there, for example, they are very, very linear, and they're very, very ideogrammatic, sort of pictographic. They're very sharp, clear images. It could be a language, it could be a hieroglyph, but given the title, I'm imagining that what it's actually dealing with is the way in which, for example, the sky judders, and you know better than me the thunderstorms of Johannesburg, which I recall from the 1990s when I saw people boating down Rocky Street. I'm not kidding you. And there's one flood. I'm not lying. There was a little boy in a little tub going down the river. So the thing is, what's happening here is it's a graphic way of dealing with the stark lateral sort of forces. Now, the thing about laterality, things coming at angles, we always think that's a bad thing. It's coming out of nowhere. Oh, we want things to come, like we believe in trench warfare. There's the body, here's the goodie, dead, dead, dead. No, but the world doesn't live like that. The world lives at 380 degrees. The world lives in sharp diagonals and major surprises constantly. And this is what's going to come in this world. But it also feels like an ancient, I mean, I'm making it up now. I'm making it think it could be a Navajo textile. You know what I'm saying? It's like it makes you realize there's so many things. How many of the patterns of beauty that we find in our lives come from the elemental world that inhabits us, that we inhabit? You know? So much of our knowledge, what I said earlier on, the myths that we create, the stories that we tell for ourselves, the memories that we invent, because the memories change them and change them and change them and change them and make them suit us better and better and better until we're happy in our fiction. You know? So the thing is, this is the nature of art. Art is not, this is why Plato hated it. Plato wanted to get all the artists, all the poets in the dungeon. And what he hated also was the sophists. Why? Because the sophists couldn't stop contradicting themselves. Why? He wants linearity, he wants dialectic, he wants antithesis. So he wants the contradiction, and he wants the reconciliation of the contradiction. But the world doesn't operate like that. Rationality operates like that. That's why we have chaotic juridical systems, for example, which still work on these Platonic models. But the world cannot be rationalized. And this is what's happening with all the system and beauty that we see. There's also an intrinsic chaos in all of that apparent order. Is the point of in each regard. How do we get time, by the way?
Yeah, good.
Yeah, how much time do you have?
Let's say, well, you probably 15, 20 minutes.
Okay, good. No, that's perfect time. So, I was reading up on this particular artist. And, yeah. What intrigued me here, when I realized this is Russell's stuff. Yes, they are photographs. And which one? You have to tell me, because I don't know which are you looking at? Okay. Oh, I agree.
Absolutely fantastic.
Yes, I did see those actually. I did see them meticulously done. Beautiful, very good. So,
Impossible to know how he actually created it.
exactly. No, I sat there. No,
I wanted to ask him, he said it was a trade show.
Yeah.
Sorry, he did what? Ah, so he's very good with fine work.
So what's happening here? What the artist Russell Scott wanted to point out to us, as I read, we tend to see the overground, you know, the plant from above the ground. And he wanted us to see the beauty of the entirety of the plant and ask us to understand how these two conditions are integrally connected. And of course now as well, the other thing I'm learning to celebrate with all of you is spring in Johannesburg, because I lost my mind the other day on something Nickel Drive. I just went crazy. I saw trees I've never seen before. when I looked at it, I thought a whole bunch of white nests in the tree, and my friend said, no, Ashraf, that's not nests. It's a strange kind of blossom. But I said, but look at it. It looks like piles and piles of feathers. But look, I was waiting for birds to leap out. But there were many of these absolutely extraordinarily beautiful things. And then I saw trees, African trees. Okay. I always say I'm going to visit Africa when I go to a game reserve, so don't believe I'm living. But the point is, there are these trees on Nickel Drive with these flat tops. They're just short. But I mean, and there's been no topiary, nothing's been done to them. They're just marvelously flat in the top in the most glorious shapes. So the natural wonder of life when you don't know anything, you can just look in awe. But here, what is reminding us of is the integrality of the world underground and the world above. And as I said earlier on about what Heraclitus mentioned, the sky falls into the earth falls into the sky. And in many ways, all creatures, humans included, have this relationship. Yes, you can't discern our roots. We don't walk around, carrying them. But we have them as well. But what it's trying to show about plant life is how astonishingly beautiful the world is that we do not normally see. Well, I don't know. There must be a number of gardeners over here. And some ruthless ones would sort of rip up their plants because they're not doing what they should be doing. There must be a few psychotics in that regard as well. But no, but for me, it's just the beauty of seeing the relationships of the totality, and of course the whole root formation. Because one of the things that the JCAF catalogue mentions is the idea of the rhizome. The rhizome is the idea of roots, but roots not in that sense like trees, they're vertical and they go down, they're connected, but roots that work horizontally and travel across and intersect and have no beginning and have no end. There's that idea of rootedness, and we have the idea of the root, the arborescent root, vertically down to the ground and back and forth. I don't know how diverse these roots are, how they move around. But the key thing is asking ourselves to think about what we do not see and embrace the totality of being, in this case, of the world around plants. This is a work that I found very baffling, and I think Clive was speaking wonderfully about it, because could you please talk, it's a Peruvian world that the Clive visited.
So this is the secret to curating, you watch Netflix. It's basically the secret to that. So I'm watching Netflix, a fantastic series called Chef's Table. And I come across this Peruvian chef called Maria Martinez, world's best restaurant in 2023. That's not important, but it is important. Because he really invented a way of thinking of cooking and food and sustainability and indigenous knowledge. He based the dishes of the restaurant, which are these over here, some of them, on the topography of the landscape of Peru. So you have the Amazon, Andes, everything in between. And he sources natural produce and food from those regions and produces very sophisticated forms of food. So, Maxi can just point out for us a couple of examples here quickly.
So these are crushed cocoa leaves that's ingested to help with altitude sickness, but also fatigue and nausea. Here you have a type of Andean grain that's very high in protein. It's almost like quinoa. Those blue shavings is algae, and behind the algae, those white blobs are dehydrated potatoes. And the way that works is that the potatoes are exposed to below freezing temperatures at night, then blasting hot sun during the day. Then it's brought inside and stepped on to remove any excess water, and that's how they're preserved.
Peruvians did that thousands of years ago.
The Incas, yeah.
Yes.
Aztecs. So the Aztecs had this whole restaurant as a sister institution. There's a research center called Meta. Now went there, worked with them. We collaborated on producing this installation. And at this research center, there's a very famous World Heritage site called Marae. And if you look at crop circles in the mountains, and what they realized is that Aztecs were already doing crop cultivation at very high altitudes, bringing soil up into the mountains to experiment with different crops in agriculture. So this Varela is brilliant in the way he puts these dishes together. And then they collaborate with different artists. So the one up here is an artist from Colombia, one over there with the rope is an artist from Peru. And Peru is very extremely biodiverse, very complex, very sophisticated form of diversity from the Amazon all the way up to the yeah, so
It's because it's mountainous.
It's mountainous, the Andes extremely high altitude, and then you go all the way down into the Amazon.
And as part of this table is trying to capture, it seems to have all these
Fermentation of the landscape, yeah. It's made from different woods from the Amazon. There's some fish bones from the Amazon as well. I went to the Amazon for 3 nights. It was an extraordinary experience. And also tasting the food in the restaurant. So for me, it was like art. They're saying, hang on, this chef is producing something so incredible. So they commission different ceramics to make different vessels. Each dish is presented uniquely. It's a very, very special experience.
these dishes are ancient.
He's drawn from different, so for example, some community, there's something like how many thousand types of minis? 3,000 types of minis or something, corn types in there. So he's gone back to communities where they're growing those again, doing sustainable practices. The rope making, the communities, they create the ropes for animals, for bridges. So this artist, contemporary artist, works with the communities and collaborates and produces installations.
And the ceramics?
So they commission different ceramists in Peru to produce the vessels for the food, for the dishes that you see. So this is topographic photographs. So if you get closer, you'll see some. It's quite hard to figure it out, but you'll see some of the blue spirulina there. They're extracting from plants. They're producing liquids. They're doing all kinds of the cocoa bean. They use the entire cocoa bean. They're making their own chocolate. They're extraordinary.
You know, there's a problem with Kimball. It's become now a very trendy thing. I was in Bolivia a month ago, and the local people are now not using that as a staple. They get more dollars since they've been restricted from growing too much cocoa leaves, and then they are now their diet is altered because it's better for them in terms of dollars to sell it to the European trendies who might it as a people think, oh, we're supporting people in Bolivia, but they're actually depriving them of a basic, because nothing else really grows at 3,500 to 4,000 meters. So really, it's a big problem. It suddenly becomes fashionable.
So certain highlands don't grow.
Yeah, it's very desolate. It's only, you can't really grow anything else.
Let's move on.
Yeah, I was going to talk about the last one, which is the pièce de résistance around the corner at the High Point Garden, which is the first one I ever saw. Well, really saw, I think. But sort of a place for us to.
Well, what?
This is incredible.
It's like a work of art, actually.
Is Barbara or Clive going to talk about the strange irrigation system? Apparently it's modeled on an ancient irrigation system, is that correct?
Betsy, start with the background.
Okay, so this is the work of Carmina Ferraro-Leca, and she is working with lima beans, but the artist is referencing the Moke culture. So they are a pre-in-can Peruvian society who work with very complex irrigation systems, similar to what you see here, but they were also known for using the beans as part of an ideogrammatic writing style. A situation where each bean with its unique black pattern is assigned to a specific idea, concept, or phrase, and that's how they were used to communicate.
The lever being apparently is a really ancient piece of well. And also, one thing I read in the catalog is also they think that this is a pre-literate society, but apparently a whole languages have been built around the being.
So in terms of what you're saying about the culture being pre-literate, that's where this table comes in. So on the table, you have a wooden grid filled with beans, and next to that is a text. The text is a copy of the Edict Against Idolatry, which is a colonial text that was written by the Spaniard missionaries when they invaded the Moche culture. The text basically condemns the entire culture, their ways of worshipping nature, but also this entire language as something that wasn't developed or sophisticated enough to be considered an official form of communication. But what Habina does is that she takes this text that condemns the efficiency of the language and turns it back on itself by translating this text using the language. So each bean in the grid corresponds with a specific line in the edict.
And it's obviously got a positive connotation as opposed to...
It's more a direct translation of the entire text. So the text itself is quite negative in terms of how they express
So the text is still there.
Yes.
And then she's taken the themes and translated the text.
So basically this exhibition, this installation was exhibited in the Biennale of São Paulo and in Mexico. So in the first iteration, she harvested the beans, dried them up, and then took the liberty of translating the text. Obviously she's inventing. It's not that so she's taking inspiration from this idea of assigning an idea to a bean. And then this text is written in Spanish and is incredibly quite derogatory towards the indigenous people of Peru. So that's why she's like, what Maxine says, is turning against it, because it's like she's using it and then translating it.
And what you were saying earlier was each bean is being to be a positive idea in its content. Did I get that?
No.
Yeah, it's a nice way, thank you.
So there's a worldview from the West that saw cultures like Macha culture as primitive, meaning without language. So oral tradition, yes, we've come to appreciate oral tradition in South Africa. We understand it in a more sophisticated way, but at the time, it wasn't that way. Here we find a culture that was having a form of communication. It was not text-based, it was using the beam as a form, so ideogrammatic, symbolic, like hieroglyphics. They actually had a language system, which is really fascinating. The artist is reflecting poetically, and she's creating a witness for us, this incredible, she's manifesting the notion of living plants and nature in front of us. So she's got this, we've got the concept and the history, but for me, what is extraordinary is the plant, and this living installation with this hydroponic system with water running through, with nutrients, and these lima beans grow like crazy. So this was 3 months, and then they get replaced. So we had to replace it 2 weeks ago. So these are all baby plants. If you come back in a month, it's going to be a lot fuller. So they eventually grow right up onto the top, into the screens.
And they bear beans?
And they bear beans, yeah. So some of the staff have got beans in the office. I'm still thinking about that, honestly.
Take them home and grow them.
And they're very beautiful things. But the idea for me as a curator was, there's a sound piece here, and her name is Zayan Khan. She's from Cape Town. And you can stand under it individually. You'll see a speaker hanging there. It's called a sound curtain. The sound comes down. She's narrating a story of a seed traveling in Morocco from the city to the coast. Then you see plants being extracted in Nigeria. The whole plant photographed with the root system. Plants as food, and then you come into the seed as a plant living and growing in front of you. So as a curator, I'm making those connections. I weave this relationship between the works. Where do you end? We talk about nature. You can have photographs, you can depict it, you can have symbolism about it. But to experience living plants in the gallery is and so that's what I'm like, Ashraf, I'm an optimist. So I come out here and I want you to feel good. I want you to feel a very different relationship to nature. So it's actually something so incredible, so diverse, we are custodians. We should be taking care of this. It's just incredible. She's an extraordinary artist.
Isn't that the point of the entire exhibition that you're trying to achieve? To give us a sense of our own humility within the grand scheme, but also to see the beautiful things we've made and created, and how things that happened thousands of years ago have enormous relevance now. We forget too much. Is that one of the things you're trying to bring?
Absolutely.
This artist is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah,
This is
very
fantastic.
So this was all produced locally. We explored the idea of shipping all the ceramics from Peru. You don't get these anymore. I remember as a kid growing up, we had these clay sewage pipes in the ground. They were like a wonder, actually. Another massive job. And so we had to convince commission with a lot of respect, ceramists. Now, I don't know if there are any ceramists here tonight, but
He's right next to you.
it was very difficult. by the way. They are very difficult. Ceramists don't just want to make anything. This was like 6 months of production. You have to work with a hydroponic company, and then a lady who actually grows the plants off-site and bring them in to reinstall. So it's quite a production. It's about 6 months to produce.
But isn't the shape something that came from
the artist? Yeah, it's all her concept. She
So
was
the
here.
ceramicist had to.
Yeah, she had to make it to spec.
And where does it go from here?
It gets taken down, dismantled, and then I look for volunteers to take all the clay pipes.
To start growing new things.
Hopefully.
Indoors in your bedroom.
And the water runs through all the time.
Yes.
Articulated through these drums.
Yes.
And actually, because normally plants you think are in soil. They've got a little bit of soil. They're actually being fed by water and nutrients in water that will keep cycling through there. And then it's hydroponic. Yeah. Every 2 days she comes and refills the water, checks the plants, puts nutrients. Later on, as they get much older and fuller, some yellow leaves, you trim them. There's a lot of maintenance. It's like a living installation. It's quite beautiful. But it's mimicking nature. The lights mimic the sun. The water and the air, because we also filter the air here. So if you have the right ingredients, the plants will grow. If you remove those elements, it's not going to grow.
Where do you filter it?
On the floors, we've got an HVAC system, pump air with ducts underneath the ground. So we keep the temperature. We do get some, but they're actually growing with these pheromones from.
The Nigerian one, the one.
So the Nigerian word, Maxine, give us a quick. Name is Zina Salawima. Register here.
So the work is titled Carrickport Pipeline. Carrickport translates as antelope and makes reference to this masquerade performance that the Ogoni people in Nigeria perform, where they basically mimic the lively movements of the antelope in the form of a dance. Now Zina has transposed footage of this dance on top of footage of a pipeline that was inserted into Nigeria and used for oil extraction. During its early days, it was a very noisy and violent process, violent in terms of all of the soil that needed to be uprooted to make space for the pipeline, and then all the ecosystems that were disturbed during that process. Today, the pipeline is no longer in use, but it hasn't been removed from the land, and it's still leaking some dangerous substances into the soil. Now there you see a kind of ripple effect. If the soil is damaged, it affects the water and plant life, which then affects the entire community.
Very, very sad.
Yeah. So you want to bring a little bit of reality to this utopia. Just remind us of the dangers of what can happen with extraction, exploitation of how we should be. The living thing contrasted with dyeing them. This is important.
This dance that they're doing, is that a celebration of what was, or remembrance of what was, or like a wish towards the show? Yeah. What,
So it's a little bit of both. It's part of a ritual performance that they usually perform to honor the land around them, but also the culture itself. But in this case, Zina has used it really carefully, and how the dance is there to make you reflect, to ask yourself, what are we doing to this land? And it's kind of like the dance is there to sort of inspire you to make a change and to understand that we all have an impact. And even though none of us necessarily caused this damage, we're all responsible for finding ways to reverse it, even if that damage doesn't happen by our own hands.
Are they going to reverse it? Is that the plan?
Hopefully, at some point.
All right.
I'm happy. I think it's more like the questions from the audience.
Yeah,
Whether she directly to any particular artworks, which specifically, I'm sure we can do engaging more thoroughly. I was terrified. I've done many walkabouts, and this is the one that scared me the most in my entire life.
Thank you, Els.
And thanks to JCAF pulling off yet another brilliant exhibition.
We love doing it. We love having you. We train our guides. Maxine is one of them. So you can book and come and see the show another time. We'll tell other people. This is a special tour of Ashraf, but normally we do in the day three tours a day. And you book online and it's free. And one of our guides will take you through the exhibition. Yeah, it's a big exhibition. It was lovely having you all.
Thank you.
This just to try and show that there's no two beans that look alike.
Pretty much so. So this is how the things naturally work.
Was it?
They naturally have